So what are Petr Pavel and Petr Macinka up to again? It seems like they have some kind of problem with each other, or what? The problem, of course, stems from the fact that Petr Pavel refused to appoint Filip Turek as Minister of the Environment, so Petr Macinka launched a crusade against Petr Pavel. It got a bit worse when Petr Pavel said something about some planes in Ukraine, after which there were immediate reactions that we won't give anything to anyone, even though Petr Pavel didn't specify which ones we should give, in what quantity, and so on. That's more complicated. However, look, this is what actually happened. Macinka was sending messages to Petr Pavel through collage, let's say messages or rather notes on social media. And in them, he basically said that if he appoints that Turk, they will come to some sort of agreement. And if he doesn't appoint him, he will cause trouble. And he basically took the interests of the Czech Republic and Petr Pavel as hostages. Petr Pavel came out with this, said he would have it investigated to see if it was blackmail, and that we'll see. Petr Macinka responded that in his opinion it's not blackmail. Tomio Okamura said that this is normal, and Andrej Babiš said he would have chosen slightly different wording, but in his opinion it's not blackmail. As for the statements from lawyers, they also say that it's not blackmail because there are no threats of violence or other coercion, in the sense that something bad should happen to Petr Pavel or his family. Of course, it could be interpreted as blackmail if we take into account the president's role and responsibility, where the president is responsible for making sure that the Czech Republic and its interests are well represented. And when Macinka says, either you do what they want or I'll screw up the interests of the Czech Republic, then theoretically you could say that he's basically threatening to harm the interests of the Czech Republic, which falls under the president's responsibility. But to call that blackmail, we'd really have to stretch the definition unbelievably far. So it's probably really not blackmail. If it really were blackmail, it would be quite spicy, because then Petr Pavel could file a lawsuit against Mr. Macinka, and that would mean, of course, that the Chamber of Deputies would have to hand Macinka over for criminal prosecution, and then we'd actually have 3 chairmen of 3 government parties with criminal issues whom the Chamber would either hand over or vote not to hand over. That way Macinka would lose all leverage over Babiš. However, in effect, it's really not about any criminal prosecution or anything like that. The point is that by publishing these messages, Petr Pavel simply and clearly showed what kind of jerk Macinka is, how he acts, how he approaches politics with a shady 90s hustler style, and he gave us a nice look at the way the chairman of the motorists intends to do politics. It's, let's say, part of a public relations campaign, because at this moment the president is presenting himself as the one who protects the interests of the Czech Republic, while Mr. Macinka is willing to sacrifice the interests of the Czech Republic for the sake of a non-member of his party with whom he goes drinking at the cider house. I wouldn't even say that this is about any real fears of blackmail or real problems for Petr Pavel. It's more about Petr Pavel running a campaign and showing what kind of person Macinka and the members of this government are. Petr Pavel is publishing these messages, and the vast majority of people have sided with him. He's the most trustworthy president we've had here in a long time. Almost 60% of the population trusts him, and he's simply going for re-election. By releasing these messages where he appears as the one fighting for the interests of the Czech Republic, even his party communicates very properly, very, let's say, smoothly, while Macinka's party communicates in a rather wild and adolescent way. So in the context of these messages, he also comes across as better and more mature. Therefore, I'd say we're witnessing a pretty good public relations campaign from Petr Pavel, and a rather laughable and poor public relations campaign from the motorists, who look like teenagers stomping their feet without descended testicles or a developed brain, and so they're needlessly arrogant. They are unbelievably aggressive and irritable. And of course, they're losing more points this way, let's say any kind of respect or esteem, because so far in this dispute, they're coming across as less statesmanlike, more clannish, more selfish. It's a party that has 4% in the polls, that got just under 6% in the elections, behaves extremely arrogantly, and is making this government, well, I would say, not so much a disgrace as a laughingstock. And although some people had the feeling that motorists could be a kind of insurance for this government, a bit of right-wing seriousness and a fresh new breeze, I would say that here we rather see stagnation, a return to the 90s, to hustling and that kind of style, playing politics, the Prague underworld, and the total arrogance of the so-called powerful in the Klaus style, so this has come back to us. Such a stale wind from the motorists, a stale wind from the exhaust, and it's not something Czech voters are at all interested in. So in this respect, I'd say Petr Pavel is quite simply walking toward victory when it comes to public relations, to voter sympathy. And the motorists here are committing suicide, political suicide. Besides that, there was a press conference here. Some people say that Macinka handled the press conference well, but I repeat to you, this is not about, let's say, explaining something. There's basically not much to explain here. Macinka explained here what he meant, that it wasn't blackmail and so on, that it was negotiation and blah, blah, blah. But as I said, there's not much to explain here. The key thing is the presentation, how it looks, and it simply looks like Macinka is a drunk idiot trying to threaten the president and taking the interests of the Czech Republic as a hostage. And he's trying to act like a prime minister or the leader of the biggest party here, even though he's absolutely marginal and insignificant little boy. Tomorrow he could stop being a minister and no one would care about him. He's absolutely insignificant. 300,000 people voted for him and he's standing against the president who was elected by 3 million people. Besides, the president clearly offered a hand to Andrej Babiš here when he said he doesn't believe that Andrej Babiš supports Mr. Macinka's actions. And Andrej Babiš clearly said that he does not approve of this behavior, that he would act differently, that he would write those messages differently, that he would say it differently, and so on. So Andrej Babiš did not stand up for Macinka. He rather took a middle ground and is trying to balance it. Petr Pavel wants to continue negotiating about this, and in this regard, I would say that we are slowly but surely seeing the outlines of a coalition that some political commentators were outlining from the very beginning. We can already see a bit of an alliance of necessity forming here between Andrej Babiš and Petr Pavel against those populist idiots, meaning freedom and direct democracy, and the motorists, which of course Andrej Babiš is also a populist, but he is not a populist idiot. He's on a slightly higher level of populism, which at this moment we can't really be too picky about, right? When we have Andrej Babiš here, we have to accept him. And it's probably a better option than the Motorkandi or the freedom and direct democracy sluts. There's nothing that can be done about it. In any case, yeah, that's the situation. Macinka is even threatening here that Pavel won't go to the NATO summit and so on. It's absolute nonsense, of course. As for who represents the Czech Republic, where Macinka has no say in that, he doesn't have the mandate for it. And talking about the president being outside the constitutional framework is, of course, also completely off base. This has already been discussed. The president is not outside the constitutional framework. If he were, Babiš or Macinka would file a competence lawsuit. By not filing it, they admit that they wouldn't win, and therefore they've decided to politically accept the president's decision. As for Macinka's interpretation that they won't file a competence lawsuit because, in his opinion, the Constitutional Court would be biased, And the attempts to play at being a constitutional judge, which Mr. Macinka demonstrated, are of course further proof of his absolute irrelevance and lack of any professionalism, which only leads to further humiliation of this government. If I were Andrej Babiš, I would really think about how to get rid of the motorists here, because unlike the Freedom and Direct Democracy members, they're not obedient, they're annoying, and they're absolutely unnecessary. So that's how it is, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see how it develops, but I think we're witnessing the suicide of the motorists here, an absolute, let's say, farewell to any political relevance. And we're witnessing a classic Peter Pavlov stance in the sense that he presents himself as someone who isn't afraid, who has the moral high ground, and some pathetic talk from the motorists won't change much about that. Yeah, the motorists could give Petr Pavel a hard time if they actually managed to get Andrej Babiš on their side, but he's also had enough of them. Let's be honest with ourselves, you really don't want to go up against Petr Pavel here, a politician who got 3 million votes and who has the upper hand in trust and support from society. This is a suicidal move, so we'll be watching as the motorists crash into a wall. Classic, yeah. That's what happens when you go 300 against a wall thinking you'll break through, but you just end up wrecked. So take care and see you next time. And with that, I think I've got it sorted for now. Bye.